On today's show, our guy, Yu Darvish, getting the nod for the opening series against the Dodgers in Seoul, reacting to that bit of news, as well as a big question. Are the San Diego Padres reverting back to their penny-pinching, money-grubbing gremlin ways, as they have not added any reinforcements to the outfield via free agency?
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, March 13th. As always, I'm your host, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javapeno or at LO_Padres or Locked On Padres on YouTube if you want to see whatever fit I'm rocking, which today, frankly, is just a blank black shirt. Or you might be familiar, by the way, with some of my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where not only do I write about the Padres, but I write about general baseball stuff, including Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism on my part, breaking down and finding out which castle best represents Ryan Mountcastle. Many more questions of such that I've answered on that website. Go check it out. I also have a new show coming out for them as well imminently that I think people are going to enjoy. But in terms of this show, ladies and gentlemen, look, today's going to be a fun one. We are talking about Yu Darvish getting the opening start for the Padres, as predicted by yours truly. And then also getting into this question over the outfield depth. Should they be signing guys? Should they be signing Tommy Pham? Are they being cheap? Is this a sign of what's next to come? Is this an inauspicious start for the Padres in free agency? We got to get into that, guys. But first, let me tell you, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Just for listening to me, you get that nice little bonus. So don't say I never did anything for you. Let's start with Yu Darvish, though. Yu Darvish, it was announced via Mr. Mike Shildt, obviously, yesterday, that he is going to get the series starting, I guess, basically MLB kickoff, which is very weird that we have like a genuine MLB kickoff, because usually it is just like, one or two, teams when you say the term kickoff. Like, it's like the first game of the season and there's only two teams playing, but baseball usually has a few more with opening day, and that's not the case here. And I kind of think that it's exciting, especially since it's going to be an international game in Seoul. I think that's really exciting, and Darvish gets the start. And look, I love Darvish. I've loved him for a long time, and this makes sense to me. And it also backs up what I've also said, which is my prediction was that Yu Darvish would get the start. On top of the thing being in Seoul, I also thought, and was proven correct, that Mike Shildt said that Musgrove will start the domestic opener March 28th at Petco, as predicted by yours truly. That's what I thought. I thought he's a San Diego guy. This is the best spot for him. And remember that Blake Snell got the start last year because Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove were hurt. So that was a big part of it, right? Is that they didn't have those guys available. And it's totally fine. Look, this isn't like some thing that you can be wrong on, right? Like, it's not like you can be wrong with the opening day starter. Frankly, I bet that this only matters if you're just someone who's going to opening day and you want to know who the opening day starter is. But other than that, I mean, this is fine. They both have experience, right? Either way, Musgrove or Darvish, these past few years, Darvish was 2021, Musgrove was last year. They've both got experience in the opener. They both have that big game vibe to them. You know what I mean? Darvish has performed. Even last year when he struggled a little bit, Yu Darvish did have a couple starts when it just, you had to have been following along too to get it. I know the stats might not back it up, but like really good in the big starts that the team really needed. As it looked like they were starting to try and make a push, he did show up. That's one thing about Darvish that I don't think that the stats will necessarily show, is that I trust him in a big game. I think he's built for that type of stuff. And even if he is not always on fire, even if the strikeout stuff seems to be going away, his strikeout percentage has gone down, these past couple years. He looked all right in spring training so far. Even still, yes, the strikeout rate did take a little bit of a dip, especially in 2022 when it went to 25%. But then, he was also really effective that year with control. So as long as he has the control, as long as he's not hurt, I think Darvish can be really good. And even still, I mean, I don't like using WAR for pitchers, but still a 2.4 win season last year, which isn't bad. I don't like using WAR for pitchers for what it's worth, because I think it uses too much of projections and expected stats. Frankly, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I just want to get into this. I don't like WAR for pitchers as much because it uses extended, like, expected stats. To me, Because, for example, like Spencer Strider had a 3.8 ERA last year, I think, but then had a greater WAR than Blake Snell. And my thing is like, I don't quite get that because Snell literally gave up less runs. There's a difference between saying you think Spencer Strider is a better pitcher versus who had a better season. And even if it was a little bit of luck and having a great Padres defense and striking out more batters than is usually replicable, you know what I mean? Something that's sustainable. Even still, like Snell had the better season. So I think that expected stats is dumb and that plays into WAR. So I don't like it for pitchers. But if you do, hey, Yu Darvish is pretty good there. Expected stats also had his ERA a little bit down. He did get a little bit unlucky. His home run fly ball ratio went back. It was 9.6% in 2022. Then it went back to 13.5. That's not super, super high. Like if it was, you know, if you look at the Cubs year, right? Like he had like a 22.8%. Like he can give up some big hits, don't get me wrong. But maybe there can be a regression expected there. And the expected ERA and the FIP all point towards, even with him hurt last year, he got a little bit unlucky with that ERA. So I'm super excited about this. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be electric. I imagine we're going to get some fun calls on this game. And I'm excited. And like I said, Musgrove makes sense for the home opener. You know what I mean? But Darvish is like the biggest star on the team. But Musgrove is the biggest Padre on the team, at least when it comes to the pitching, if that makes any sense. That's how I kind of feel about the situation. But it's exciting. And also, more news, Jackson Merrill hit a home run yesterday's game, or 2 days ago now when you're listening to this episode. My apologies for missing the episode yesterday. Got really, really busy opening day and new shows and all that stuff. It's been a little bit crazy. But Jackson Merrill, 460-foot blast the other day. In my opinion now, officially a guarantee for opening day roster. And I think that he's going to be the starting center fielder. Whether or not he can play center effectively remains to be seen. I think Padres fans should also note that just because Tatis was able to transition from being a shortstop to outfielder does not mean that Jackson Merrill will. I am optimistic that he can, and he's been effective at basically every, level, including the complex league, But from, A to high A to double A, he's succeeded and has a good feel for the ball, but it is important to temper expectations, and I imagine that the team is as well. But that's the thing we got to talk about today, right? We also have to talk about, are they riding and hoping too much on some of their young guys that are projected to make the roster and potentially be the starters on opening day, as opposed to getting some reinforcements, some other players, some other cheap free agents? And I think this is actually a really complicated issue, and I actually talked about it a little bit on the previous episode, and I talked about it on Twitter. Go follow me again at Javier. But, are they getting a little bit too, are we expecting a little bit too much from Merrill for a team that's supposed to win now? Not a team that's rebuilding. If it was a team that's rebuilding, that's one thing. But for a team that's trying to win now, are you being a little bit bullish and just hoping that you can bring guys back up to the major league roster like right now and have them contribute immediately? This has been an issue with the Padres for a while, in my opinion. And, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to see. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll just have to see. But before we get into that question, that big old spanking question at the center of today's episode, let me just take a second to talk to you about, what do you think it's going to be? What do you think it's going to be? No, it is not FanDuel. I tricked you. It is instead Prize Picks, ladies and gentlemen. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Boom, right out of the gate. That's already dare I say that's all you need to know. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and, gambling sharks and all that stuff, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Look, just because football season's over, it don't mean you can't get in on the action, man. Come on now. We still got other sports. We got March Madness coming up. We got baseball coming up. Don't you want to be that person that's picking Jackson Merrill, who I just told you to be cautious about? Maybe you want to pick him in Prize Picks. Get you a couple hits in a given day or given week. Wouldn't it be the craziest thing I've ever heard? Sometimes guys succeed immediately, and then the major league players catch up to them, and then they have to, like Ellie De La Cruz last year, right? So maybe you want to do that. And if you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley, guess what? You can do that on the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. It even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you, and the rest of your entry stays alive. So that's really cool. What's not to like about Prize Picks? We love Prize Picks. It blew up, especially in baseball circles, so you might even be familiar with it. Players and stats you're selecting, highlight your winnings from Prize Picks. How fun it can be, ladies and gentlemen. Send me your picks, whatever you want. I don't care. Shouts to Prize Picks. But folks, here we go. Here's the call to action. Let's check it out. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right, LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. It's highly encouraged, ladies and gentlemen, by your boy to check this out. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Your first listen, usually, every day. Free and available on all platforms. Quite the ad read from your boy. Put a lot of energy into that one. What can I say? I was just feeling it. I was feeling the Prize Picks mojo. I'm feeling the like prediction. Let's talk shop. Let's make our own wagers with each other and like debates. I'm feeling it because we're right there in baseball. You know what I mean? And speaking of right there, let's talk about now, guys, the issue with the Padres and their spending. This has been brought up on Twitter. This has been brought up in the athletic surveys. This has been brought up all over. And it's a fair point to bring up. And it is also fair to bring up because I am someone who is always on this podcast explaining, and I don't want to be patronizing about it, but I give my take on how this is why I never fear the Orioles, because I'm like, that team never spends. What did I say last year? I thought they were going to get smoked. They got smoked in the first round. Brewers, same thing. Guardians, I don't know if they weren't in the postseason last year, so not them. But, you know, I've been a big proponent of saying you need to spend. And almost every time when teams are hyping up young guys and hyping up, you know, their other players bouncing back and stuff like that, when you get that sort of messaging vibe, it's usually quite simply because the owner wants another, you know, yacht. You know what I mean? Like, that's usually what happens, i.e., don't listen to anything the Red Sox front office says. They got rid of Mookie Betts because the owner didn't want to pay. It's as simple as that. There was no baseball strategy involved in it. And especially looking back at that trade, I believe there's only one player still on the roster from that trade of a Hall of Fame player who's the best player they'd have since Pedro Martinez, right? So I'm really always like very visceral and very incendiary. I forgot how you say that word when it comes to this stuff. With the Padres, I think it's slightly more complicated because they are a team that's already spending a decent amount, about 166 right now. And also, and now the counter, I imagine some people are thinking, well, the Red Sox are spending a decent amount. Yes, but in contrast and in relatively speaking, right? The Padres are spending enough. They are never a team that spent so much. So I don't think that you want to immediately raise the white flag, the freak out flag, raise the alarm, whatever the term you want to use, because the Padres haven't been spending upwards of $200 million again. It's really important to note that I think a big thing behind this is we might not even talk about this next year. It might just be because they really want to reset their luxury tax threshold. And given that they took out a loan, it's at least somewhat understandable that the Padres are like, we actually do need to save. We've been spending a little bit much more than we might have the capability to. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody's rich and nobody goes, I've already said this, rich people don't go broke the same. Like, I think that they'd be fine, even if they had exceeded this. But man, that's for another day. You know what I mean? There's too many teams in baseball that spend nothing. So I think that you should be a little bit happy that the Padres are spending a lot. I understand that point about the Red Sox and that they're spending a lot, but it's all about relatively speaking. You know what I mean? This is an entirely new territory we're in when it comes to the Padres. They wouldn't pay Chase Headley back in the day. And now they're like, we'll give Manny and Bogarts in the same offseason. Why not? And Cronenworth, you too. Let's do it. So that's one thing that I think is worth being brought up. And again, I think resetting the luxury tax threshold is going to be important. You know what I mean? Because they don't want to, because of the loan and all that stuff. And you get to head into next offseason with a much deeper free agency class, which I've been saying a lot. It's important not to have too much money carrying over into next year. Now, here's the thing. You know, some people have responded to me saying, well, like, you know, like, you can't be, what is it that people say to me? I'm forgetting what they say exactly. That for next offseason, that the free agency class, that you can't necessarily project for then when you're still a team that's trying to win now. I understand that as well. But to me, that's all the Padres have been doing these past few years, is getting those big name players, getting those big marquee guys, and they have this mercenary group. And to the point where you're actually wondering, is that part of the problem why they don't necessarily have all that much chemistry? Because no one on the team knows each other. I mean, they know each other through the grapevine, I imagine. It's the baseball fraternity. They're all all-stars. But I do wonder if actually giving younger players who are used to playing with each other, that might be a little bit more fluent and acclimated with each other, might be a good thing instead of just bringing over these large personalities from all these different teams. And maybe that's contributing to some poor clubhouse chemistry. It's totally possible, at least. And for next year's free agency class, if they reset the luxury tax threshold, then that's great. You know what I mean? Then you get to go into that free agency class with a lot more. Next year, it's like around 150 million still carrying over. So you have to be careful not to spend big on this. And now here's the thing. Some people might say, well, but Javi, Tommy Pham and Eddie Rosario aren't going to cost that much. I agree, and we're going to talk about them in a second. But I have been seeing this narrative and this talk of the Padres not spending since the start of free agency, since there was not just your bench type of players like the aforementioned Pham and Rosario, but your Otanis, your Bellingers, your Jordan Montgomerys, your Yamamotos, your whatever, right? Like, this has been talked about from the beginning. And this has also been talked about from years ago. I remember getting a lot of questions on my podcast about why the Padres didn't sign Nick Castellanos. I'm a big proponent of having roster flexibility when your stars are already in place. If you are some of those other teams that I make fun of all the time, they don't have a lot of stars in place. That's why I mock them for only doing those tertiary moves. With the Padres, they have all the stars. They just need to now master the tertiary moves. Whether it be prospects, whether it be little signings, I get that, but I've heard these complaints for a while, is basically what I'm trying to say. So I don't think that this spending thing is unique to just this year. And frankly, is it possible? And I know that as an outsider, you know, compared to a lot of listeners and viewers to this fan base, that this may come off a little bit wrong, but maybe it's that people are just not used to having so many good players and having a team that's ready to do something now and not just wait on farm guys, that they're like, screw it, we don't care about the future, because that's what they've told us all these times is look at our young guys, and then they never do anything. You know what I'm saying? So like, I understand fans who are like, we literally don't care about the future, just spend away. Totally get that. But doing that is how you end up in the situation we're in, right? They waited. Guess what? Juan Soto became available. Then they didn't wait, extended too many guys, and maybe that's why they had to get rid of Juan Soto. So that's the situation that you find yourselves in. And also, by the way, I don't think the Padres have necessarily shown for sure that they're going to be cheap. You know why? Because on top of the stars that they already have on this team, which is much different than other teams who have much greater means that I've talked about already ad nauseum on this podcast, but also that they showed signs of spending. Dennis Lin from The Athletic talked about how the Padres brass was really, really pissed, really upset and frustrated that they didn't get Jung-Ho Lee, who ended up getting a massive, massive contract from the Giants. By what I mean by that is not because he's, you know, getting paid more than other players, but more just that he got paid a lot more than what was expected for a player that has not played in Major League Baseball at all, hasn't faced, you know, Major League Baseball pitching once. So I totally get that. But for me, I looked at it and also said, but they were interested. They were interested in giving out a big sort of contract, making a splash in free agency. And again, they didn't do a 6-year 113 like they gave for Jung-Ho Lee, which is going to be paying him $7 million this year and then 16, 22, 22. Then there's an opt-out for 20 and then 20 after that. But the fact that they were in the running, the fact that this was something that was being talked about a lot from yours truly too, shows they are still down to make a big investment. So if you want to look at it positively, it might be they just don't like some of the players out there. Again, it's a weak free agent class. Do not confuse them not wanting to get a free agent player necessarily with meaning that it's only money. Maybe it is because they're like, we actually don't like some of these players out there. And not to mention, how many times have we said that players who go from another place to the Padres, specifically with batters, rarely get better. The only thing that can happen is you stay the same. Or you're Gary Sanchez, who's literally one of the only exceptions over these past few years for a player that came over the Padres and got better. Guy hit 19 home runs in like 73 games. It was insane. But then Drury, even Soto at first, Josh Bell, Adam Frazier, Mitch Moreland, right? Like all these guys, Nelson Cruz, Robinson Cano was already bad, but you get my point, right? Like they've brought in a lot of new bats that have gotten worse. Even Manny Machado's first year wasn't very good with the Padres, and he even had a couple moments that weren't great. Xander Bogaerts' first year. But, you know, those are stars, and I expect them to bounce back. That's my point. So maybe it might not just be money, but the fact that they're not super interested. And that's why I think the Jung-Ho Lee rumor points to, is that they're still interested in spending money, But if it wasn't Lee, they were like, look, we're not getting Shohei. We're not overpaying for Bellinger. We don't think what he did last year was legit. We'll just maybe add some guys if we need them. Let's test out what our young guys have for once, because we never do that. But that's just my opinion. And I'm not done yet talking about this, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, no. We're not done with that just yet. We have to talk about now the other side of that argument. You know, not necessarily my argument, but I'm going to give the devil's advocate perspective for what everybody else is complaining about. Because it's totally legitimate. I really do. This is an open discussion. Leave your comments. Give me your thoughts, whatever. That's what we do out here, ladies and gentlemen. But before we get into that, we got to talk one more time. And we talked about them at the top of the show. They made a little Marvel cameo at the top of this show. And that is the good folks over at Gametime. Look, buying tickets can be frustrating. I've been trying to buy tickets for a game myself in April. A Yankee game against the Marlins for some reason. Because, I don't know, I just want to go watch a baseball game. But it can be frustrating sometimes to get tickets. But with Gametime, they make it much, much easier. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for not just the sports and baseball, but music, comedy, theater, all sorts of things. They got you covered with all sorts of tickets to all sorts of shows with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats if you're a visual learner like myself, and their best prices guaranteed. Gametime takes the guesswork, not the guest work because you are the guest. No. But the guessing part out of buying tickets. Man, I am ad-libbing a lot these days, aren't I? But seriously though, last minute tickets, they've got zone deals, flash deals, always new deals popping up on Gametime, which is really great. Lowest prices guaranteed, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. They will give you back if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, which is sweet. So check that out, guys. Download the Gametime app, create a code, and create an account. Ugh, I'm struggling today. And use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Sometimes my mouth goes faster. You know what I mean? It goes faster than I can keep up with. What can I say? Locked On, you know how to spell it, for $20 off. Create that account with the Gametime app. Go check it out today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed with Gametime. And just like that, we're back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. If you're always wondering why I'm drinking that water like between breaks, it's because it's hard. I talk a lot, if you didn't know already, so it can be a little bit hard for me, and sometimes your mouth gets a little bit dry. So that's why I always have to do that, because I don't know how to stop and take a break in the middle of my rants and ramblings. It just happens sometimes. But anyway, let's continue those rants and ramblings. Let's talk about the players that people think that they're being cheap about. Right now, again, I just want to emphasize all the points from before. You know, think about those again before I get into this, as well as the fact that, look, this is also a team that apparently wants to extend Ha-Seong Kim, so keep that in mind. That all being said, if the Padres aren't willing to give 1 year or so deals, that's something that I think is worth critiquing. Now, however, I will say, there's something to be said for, yeah, okay, even if they were to get Tommy Pham for 1 year, $6 million, right? Maybe it's not a money thing, but so much like a roster flexibility thing, because if you have that guy on your team, you're probably going to play him, and maybe they like some guys in their farm that are going to be available later. Maybe they think that guys like Jacob Marcia are going to come up and be a bigger deal. Maybe they think that there's some trade possibilities, right? There's a lot of different areas of that when it comes to roster flexibility, but in terms of those players that might not cost too much, I understand it. People have complained about Eddie Rosario, who last year was a pretty decent player, like a pretty decent fourth outfielder, the type of guy that the Padres might need, considering that their starting outfield maybe Jerkson, Profar, Jackson Merrill, and Fernando Tatis Jr. Obviously, the latter, most of which is awesome. But Eddie Rosario, like 100 WRC plus, 1.4 F4, not a good defender at all, though. 21 home runs, though. Is that the type of player that you could use just every now and then? Maybe even when Machado gets back, could he be a DH? I could see that. I do get that. But instead, he signed with the Nationals, so they missed out on him. Then you have Tommy Pham, all right? And here's the thing. When it comes to Pham, look, when it comes to Pham, I think it is worth bringing up in terms of the team needing some lefties in their lineup. I think that it could be that they're cheap. It could be for the roster flexibility thing. I think it could also be that Pham's a righty. I think it's possible, and I must emphasize as much as possible, because this could very well just be them being cheap, but both Graham Pauley and Jackson Merrill are lefties, while Tommy Pham is not. And I think that might be why those two, they're bullish on them making the opening day roster, because after the Juan Soto trade, the only lefty in the lineup was Jake Cronenworth. So then Graham Pauley and Jackson Merrill, if they are starting opening day, those are your two other lefties to help provide some more differentiation in your lineup. You don't want to be like the Yankees who have all lefties, for example, and that's why they get killed every year, because teams, I think, tend to exploit that, the best teams, you know what I mean, when they get into the big games. And with Pham, you know, he's not a lefty. Now, Rosario was a lefty, so it is worth bringing that up. Like, that actually might have been a better ad, but maybe they're really concerned about the defense. Maybe they're concerned about the fact that he never gets on base at a whole great of a clip, and maybe they want some on-base percentage guys, because, again, I mean, his lifetime career average on base is 305. Like, that's not very good. So I think they're looking at it more as he's not an on-base guy, he's home runs only, and we think we could find that elsewhere. And or maybe what we want from our bench players, because we have so many stars already, is just guys that can get on base. Maybe that's what they're hoping from Grant Pauley and Jackson Merrill, that they're not going to hit for a lot of power, but at least initially. But they will just be good, solid batters who have a good bat-to-ball skill about them, and they can get on base. That's totally possible, right? And what's it called? With Tommy Pham, on the other hand, here's the thing, is that the team has still shown interest. I think that's important. So while people are complaining about the money thing, if they're still showing interest but haven't made a move, one, it could just be because the series in Seoul is coming up so soon that they just need to get ready because they have a game earlier than other teams. Like, maybe that has something to do with it, and it might be a move that comes afterwards. But there's still reports that they're showing interest from the San Diego Tribune, from a bunch of different places, in players like not just Tommy Pham, who we've talked about, but also Adam Duvall and Michael A. Taylor. I personally, in terms of those last guys, Taylor I feel is unnecessary if we're rolling with Jackson Merrill, because Jackson Merrill I think can be an 80 WRC plus guy, which is basically what Michael A. Taylor is, right? Michael A. Taylor is a great defensive player, but the bat isn't necessarily there, and it's actually never been there. So for me, I look at that and say, Merrill has higher upside offensively. If he does struggle offensively, like really, really badly, then you could throw in Jose Azocar, who can be a defensive wizard too. He's really fast. He's got great jump on the ball, and I don't think he's gotten enough playing time this past few years for Grisham. I think Grisham had a little bit too much of a monopoly on the position, given where his bat was. So I don't mind Azocar as the backup if we're rolling with Jackson Merrill. I've been big on Adam Duvall for a while. His expected weighted on base isn't the best. It's been hovering below 300, around 200 for the past couple years, but he is pretty good defensively and has that ability that Rosario has with the home runs, with better overall like on base ability. And like I said, with the defense, he's actually been pretty good before. His last kind of times in left field, I don't think that he's going to replicate like the 16 defensive runs saved that he had in left field. What was it? Yeah, he had 16 defensive runs saved and 8 outs above average, but he's been a pretty good defender. In fact, back in 2021, that was a big thing that helped the Braves. 6 defensive runs added, 1 out above average. Like, he was pretty good there. And again, I think that his on-base skill is a little bit better than someone like Eddie Rosario. Just a tiny, tiny bit, but he is super streaky. But me personally, because of the defense, I prefer Duvall. But I'm getting to boil down on this. Pham, I want to talk about really quickly. Again, so I'm out on Michael A. Taylor. I think that we can just roll with Jose Azocar. I really do. I think he could be just as good defensively as Michael A. Taylor. Or if he's not as good, I think the difference will be negligible. That's the thing on Duvall. Tommy Pham, though, his expected weighted on base has been much better than all the players we've mentioned so far. 361 last year and has been hovering around 350 for the last 5. He's much more consistent. His plate discipline is excellent, right? He doesn't swing at bad pitches. He's able to draw walks. And that's really important, man. That's really important. Like, especially for what I talked about before, which is maybe the team is saying we already have the power. We have Bogarts, Machado, all these sort of guys, maybe even Campizano, maybe even Hassan Kim to a degree, and Tatis might go nuclear this year. What if we just get a guy that's a little bit more of an on-base dude? 1.8 F4 last year, which isn't amazing because he's not the best fielder, but 328 on-base percentage, 110 WRC plus. He doesn't swing at bad pitches. He gets good walks, and he lowered his strikeout rate, which I think was important, from 26.8% the year before to 22%. Kind of what it usually is. That's usually his strikeout rate, right? And I love that. So Pham, I can understand, right? And also, frankly, I like that he was a vet. A kind of like a veteran presence for that Arizona Diamondbacks team. I do look into stuff like that. if we're like, doing pros and cons and it's like really like it's a hard decision to make between what player to get, then I really want to take that into consideration for a team that went as far as it did, for a guy who was giving up his plate appearances for someone else so they could reach some plateau or whatever it was that he did last year. I don't have it right in front of me. And like I said, made the World Series last year. Maybe he could be good for the clubhouse. Having that sort of tough, veteran personality in there might actually do good. And all things aside, maybe he could just help us when we face Arizona and be our intimidating enforcer when we have to go up against Jock Peterson. You know what I mean? So that's possible. All in all, I like the idea of Tommy Pham. I think it is very possible. The team tends to not do retreads in situations like this, but maybe Pham was just the unfortunate victim of the 2021 collapse, and they just don't want to return to that. I can see that possibility too. But for me, I think they could do it. I think it's possible that's what's holding this up is one, all the weirdness with having to get ready for the series in Seoul. And also maybe he's asking for more than 1 year. If that's the case, I don't think I'm interested. And that's no offense to Tommy Pham. I think other teams should be, but this team has too many players locked down for long term for us to be having a player that we know is going to be on the team for longer. Look what just happened with Matt Carpenter. They had to cut him and just eat the salary, which plays into the whole thing with maybe this is why they keep being cheap or have to be cheap now because they've had so many bad money decisions lately. So that could be a possibility. Or if it's just 1 year, I wouldn't mind Pham. I really wouldn't. I think he's the type of player that can help you win now. And it's not a guarantee that someone like Jackson Merrill is going to be great, right? So that's the whole thing. But me personally, I don't know enough, right? Because then what if Merrill's bad and then it's like, oh God, all we have is a Zocards or center field. Maybe we should get Michael A. Taylor or Adam Duvall or some of these guys. But to me, I think that Pham should be more of the priority because I don't feel awesome about Jerickson Profar. I don't know exactly who he would have as his backup either necessarily. So a lot of questions. Merrill might even play some left field sometimes and they might start as Zokar in center. But to me, with the whole money spending issue, I really do think that the Jung Ho Lee thing, everything I've talked about on this podcast suggests that you got to give it a little bit more time. It's totally possible. If next year comes and they're at 150 and hey, maybe they trade Cronenworth somehow, whatever. They have the, that much money allocated and it's a deeper free agent class and they still don't do anything. They don't give out like a $20 million per year thing to some player out there. Then we can talk, especially on the pitching side of things because pitching might get interesting. But for now, I would calm down. And remember, we do this every year. I think Pham might be asking for 2 years. That's just me. And maybe that's the holdup. But then again, I've been talking too much on this podcast. You guys get it. All right? You guys get it. You guys get what I've been going for. I don't think it's the end of the world. And I think that they're still going to sign. I think it's been a bad free agent class and it's been weird. That's what I think has been happening. I think Preller himself was like, I need to wait for the market to calm down. Blake Snell hasn't even signed yet. Jordan Montgomery hasn't signed yet. He just won the World Series. So keep that stuff in mind. Don't panic. And what if Grant Pauley and Jackson Merrill are really good? And like they're not just being cheap. What if they're like, we really think these guys are going to be awesome and can be as good as Tommy Pham and that Grant Pauley can be a decent enough guy at third base potentially while Machado is out and nursing that injury before he gets back. Not inconceivable, so I recommend keeping that in mind. But with that all being said, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Please do that before the season starts, as well as at LO_Padres and Locked On Padres on YouTube. Tomorrow's show, you know what we're doing? We're talking lineups, ladies and gentlemen. What is the ideal lineup? And what are some lineup questions, just in general, for the Padres heading into opening day? What I think it should look like, what I think it might look like. Some questions in there. We're going to get into all that. And then on Friday, don't know just yet, might be talking about a Fun Friday. It's been a while since we did Fun Friday. We might do an episode talking about former targets that the Padres are interested in, like a where are they now sort of perspective. That might be fun. I don't know. So we'll get into that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies. Take care.